Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, big week ahead. And one of those things that there's a lot on the agenda and a lot that needs to get done in a short period of time, from voting rights to something on moving the child tax credit, moving something that we're going to be able to have Democrats run on this coming year. But it's a big week, especially on the voting rights. And I can't emphasize enough to be calling your representatives and saying, hey, we without question most certainly need to get some stuff done. And here to share some thoughts on how that happens, I've asked Sam Cornale to come talk with us. Sam is the executive director of the Democratic National Committee, Democrats.org, the website if you want to check out some of the work that they do there. Sam, thanks for taking some time for us.
It's great to be having me on.
So I'm looking at the week ahead, and there is a lot of opportunity, a lot of hope. Where are we going this week?
Well, the president and the vice president are headed down to Atlanta tomorrow for a big speech on voting rights. This is yet another step in the march towards historic voting rights legislation that the president has been full-throated about. It's one of their top priorities. As you mentioned, there are several big priorities. This president and this vice president are trying to do big things, and they've already done some absolutely massive things. But down in Atlanta, the president is going to lean further into the fact that we need rules changes to accommodate historic voting rights legislation. In no small measure because democracy is at stake. And the contrast with Republicans could not be more clear. You have one party that is full-throated in their support of voting rights, wanting to make it fair and accessible for everyday Americans to go and cast their ballot through a number of different mechanisms. And you have Republicans who continue to promulgate the big lie. And the big lie that a little more than a year ago caused an insurrection, a violent insurrection at the Capitol, where law enforcement officers ultimately lost their lives. And now that same big lie is driving Republicans across the country to pursue the most extreme anti-voter legislation in a generation. And so tomorrow down in Atlanta, the president and the vice president are going to be full-throated in their support for a historic voting rights package that I am hopeful will ultimately get through Congress.
You and I will agree we need to do something on voting rights. The Republicans have been, well, you got to give them credit. They've been very busy on figuring out how to rig the next election. But if anything is to get done in the Senate, if we are to move voting rights legislation, you're going to have to do something with the filibuster. And the right wing is apoplectic over the possibility of that happen. In fact, Grover Norquist's group put out a statement basically saying that you guys want to destroy one of the pillars of democracy in order to preserve democracy. This is what they're saying your argument is, sort of like a wartime commander saying, we have to destroy a village to save it. They go on to say, but if the filibuster goes the way of the dodo birds, congressional Democrats, that's you, are going to be able to ram through Green New Deal, woke spending. It's going to be horrible. It's going to be horrible. Sam, you're going to do all this horrible stuff.
Well, I mean, you and I both know, Rick, that Mitch McConnell's only measure of success is power. And if you want me to believe that Mitch McConnell won't do everything in his power to get every tax cut for the wealthy, well-connected corporations through, if you don't believe that Mitch McConnell is going to ram as many judges through as possible if he's put back in control of the Senate, I mean, these are crocodile tears. And the reality is that President Biden has been very, very clear that this is specific to voting rights legislation. Because at the end of the day, the filibuster doesn't matter if we no longer have a democracy. And, that not to be overly alarmist, but that's really where we are. You have fake audits in just about every battleground state being pushed by Republicans. In my home state of Wisconsin, Rick, you have Republicans trying to get rid of the entire elections apparatus infrastructure and install their own Republican cronies to be able to determine the outcome of elections, to not let votes matter, but to make sure that the people counting the votes can decide who won or lost. That's not where we are. And so the president, to his credit, after a 40-year career in the Senate, he is an institutionalist. And the fact that President Biden is now saying that we need meaningful reform and changes to the rules of the Senate in order to protect our democracy, that's a huge step forward. He deserves a ton of credit for that. And at the end of the day, the Republicans, they're against everything and they don't stand for anything. And that's the contrast that we are going to spend the next 10 months delivering directly to the American people, from volunteers at the doors and on the phones to our paid media to our organizing efforts. At the end of the day, we have an incredibly strong record to run on. It will be voting rights in part, but not exclusively. We're going to get more done.
No, and this is where I've been saying for the longest time, and I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad to hear what you're saying, because I think it's important for people to understand that the Democrats maybe are willing at some point to ball up their fists and get in there and throw a couple of punches, because it's been the MO kind of that when you got the keys to the steamroller, it's parked on the side of the road. It's time to lead, get some stuff done. And I know Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema, that seems to be the fly in the ointment right now. But things got to get moving. People want results, not excuses.
Well, your listeners shouldn't forget that Senator Manchin has already supported meaningful voting rights legislation. He voted for it on the floor of the Senate. We're going to get something done. There is a deal to be had on the Build Back Better agenda, which would cut costs, expand elder care and child care to make it easier to care for our loved ones in the dawn of their life and the twilight of their life. And on voting rights, this is one of the top issues that this president and vice president are animated by. Yeah. And at the end of the day, I'm confident we're going to get something through. But at the end of the day, the midterms and campaigns generally are about three things, Rick. They're about money, having resources to get your message out, to deliver it to the American people. We've raised more last year than any non-presidential year ever in the history of the DNC. We are matching what the Republicans have done. And as we all know, Republicans are the party of dark money. So that is not nothing that our grassroots are stepping up. Average donation in the low double digits here. The second is our record. Put aside Build Back Better and voting rights and any other additional pieces of legislation that I'm confident we're going to get through this year. We already have an incredible record to run on, Rick. Think about it. The American Rescue Plan cut child poverty in half, $130 billion to schools to help them reopen and do so safely. When President Biden took office, 46%, give or take, of students were attending school in person full time. That's now well north of 90%. We have more work to do. We're going to see this pandemic evolve, and we'll have to respond accordingly. But the American Rescue Plan alone has set this country on a much stronger trajectory. We then passed the bipartisan infrastructure law. Donald Trump spent 4 years talking about how it was infrastructure week. You know who got it done in his first year? President Biden. Right. The unemployment rate down below 4% now. That is the largest single year drop ever in history. More than 6 million jobs created by this president last year. That's the most in the first year of a presidency ever. I mean, I could go on and on and on, Rick.
Yeah,
but the
there's
reality
a lot
is,
to unpack there. No, I mean, there's an awful lot in there, but and we're going to get to some of that stuff. But the voting rights thing, my problem with all of it is Joe Manchin wrote the bill. How come this isn't already passed? This is my problem. We were supposed to get the For the People Act. He said, no, I've got something better. I'm going to get 10 Republicans to come along. They didn't. How come this hasn't already passed?
Well, as I just walked through, there's been a lot we've accomplished already. I think part of this is just the challenge of how many crises this administration and Democrats that were put into power in January of last year inherited from Donald Trump and the Republicans. And the reality is, I can only articulate what the president, the vice president, and senators from Chuck Schumer to Joe Manchin have said. Joe Manchin, again, voted for that very legislation that you're talking about. And so tomorrow, what the president is going to do is continue to raise the urgency to say now is the time. Majority Leader Schumer has set a hard deadline of next week in order to get a vote on voting rights legislation. And I know, senators like Warner in Virginia and Senator Tester in Montana, they started out in a place where they weren't comfortable with meaningful changes to the filibuster in order to protect voting rights. And now they are on board. So the situation has evolved. Good. And, at the end of the day, Rick, I think highly of myself, but I'm never going to purport to be in the middle of those very conversations that you just referenced. But I know they're happening, and I know the president is full-throated in his support and driving the march to meaningful voting rights legislation.
Good, and we can help out by making sure we're calling those senators and letting them know where we're at. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show with Sam Cornale. He's the executive director of the Democratic National Committee. Democrat.org is their website. We'll get links out on social media. I can check out the Democrats page. You brought up a whole bunch of stuff. There's a lot to get through there. And the child poverty thing to me is a huge one. I was, as a kid, grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland, in poverty, in American poverty. I mean, we were at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. I can't imagine in the 70s what a couple $100 a month would have done for our lives. And it's, $250 a month to me now doesn't seem like anything. But the fact that it made such a massive difference in the lives of working families and of children in this country just seems like an absolute no-brainer that we would continue it. Now, understand, generally, I'm against the idea of handouts. But when I look at the records of what happened, this seems like it should have already gone through. And I can't understand why, again, Joe Manchin being the guy kind of holding this up.
Well, this is yet another example of President Biden and Democrats reorienting the economy to benefit people who power the economy. And make no mistake about it, that's working people. I was not raised dirt poor by any means, Rick. But, every fall when soccer season started, my brothers and I, I'm one of three, would walk out to the garage and we'd rummage through the box of secondhand soccer cleats. My mom did everything she could to provide for our family. And you're absolutely right that a couple $100 every single month can make a huge difference, saving for college, diapers, food on the table. God forbid, every now and again, families have the opportunity to eat at a restaurant once it's when it's safe to do so. And make no mistake about it, Rick, the American Rescue Plan, which cut child poverty in half, put hundreds of dollars into the pockets of working parents every single month. Every single Republican member of Congress voted against that legislation. And you know what they didn't vote against? The $1.5 trillion kickback to corporations under the Trump tax cut. So that's the contrast we're talking about here, Rick. People want to argue whether it's a handout or not. I'm sorry, but a couple $100 that helps everyday Americans with children put food on the table, stock their pantry, fix the broken roof. I mean, that is not a handout. That is an economy that is finally working for the people who work.
No, when I was a kid, and I go back to this often, when I think about policies, I think about where I came from. And, there were many months throughout the year where at the end of the month, there was literally nothing in the house. And I want that for no child. And as I said, while I'm against the idea of handout programs, this seems, the evidence is there. People used it for the right things. I don't care what the rumor is of what may or may not have been said by Joe Manchin. I don't believe people are buying drugs or doing other things with it. I think people are using that money the way it was meant to take care of their kids and their families.
Absolutely. I mean, again, to go back to the Trump tax cut for a little bit of contrast here, Rick, as your listeners are sitting around, the kitchen table with their family members debating politics, God forbid it comes up. $1.5 trillion, more than 80% of it went to the absolute wealthiest among us in corporations. And what did they use it for? Largely to buy their own stock back, to make more money off of U.S. taxpayer dollars. They made more money. And what we're doing is putting a reasonable amount of money into the pockets of working people that goes right back into the economy. That to me is a contrast, a conversation I am ready and willing to have with the American people.
And one that, absolutely we do need to have, Sam. Now, I did want to get some of your thoughts on last week's anniversary. And I hate to use the word anniversary. I'm not sure what the right word for a horrible, tragic insurrection is. But I wanted to get your thoughts. I mean, we find out last week that the vice president was actually in the DNC when the pipe bomb was found. And yet I keep hearing people telling me, especially my right-wing friends, that it was a patriotic day, Sam. It was a day like any other. It was a good, God-fearing Christian kind of day with people loving their countries. And I think, as the one guy said, they were just out, seeking redress of their grievances. I wanted to get your thoughts.
President Biden had a line that really stuck with me from that day, his speech 4 or 5 days ago, which was, you can't love your country only when you win. And the reality is that for the first time in generations, maybe ever, the Republican Party, the very core of one of the two political parties in the United States, refuses to support, to defend the very democratic ideals that have made America the country that it is. That is jarring. That is absolutely jarring. I'm sorry, but the patriots on January 6th were not those who were wielding Trump flags and beating law enforcement officers. They were the law enforcement officers. The patriots are not people, using fake audits in Arizona to try to change the clear outcome of the election. 81 million votes Joe Biden earned and Kamala Harris earned in 2020. The patriots are the local election officials who are doing everything in their power, despite death threats and despite the Republican National Committee and Republicans across the country refusing to defend them. Those are the true patriots. And so, January 6th was unbelievably unfortunate. I mean, it was sad. Law enforcement officers lost their lives. Others lost their lives. But there's only one political party now that is defending the very democratic principles that make us the beacon of light for the world. And that's the Democratic Party. And, make no mistake about it, Republicans can't win in a fair fight. They know it, Rick. They don't have ideas. They don't have policies that are supported by more than 70% of the American people like Democrats. So what are they doing? They're going and trying to rig the very playing field of democracy. And we're not going to let them happen. We're not going to let it happen.
Which is why we need to get something, especially on the voting rights front, but also the other things. At the end of the day, we have a lot of work to do, and there's a lot that needs to be cleaned up, and we need actual leadership in this. So last line of questioning I've got for you, in looking at this, what's the request from us? I mean, I believe democracy is participatory. I believe each one of us have a right, a duty to be involved. What are we asking people to do? What are we telling folks?
Well, there's a lot outside of our control right now, Rick. I feel it, and I'm, the top staff person at the Democratic National Committee. I'm sure you feel it, and you have a huge literal megaphone in front of you. I'm sure your listeners feel it. There's a lot outside of our control. But at the end of the day, there's a ton inside of our control too, within our control. We have power, we have agency right now. And when voting rights passes, when Build Back Better passes, when we are already out there communicating all of our accomplishments to date to the American people, but we still have to go win elections. We still have to make sure that Republicans don't flip state legislatures that are currently in Democratic control. We still have Democratic governors across the country that are the last line of defense. They're the only thing standing between really bad, frankly, kind of nutty Republicans and very good people.
There you go.
Women who need access to reproductive rights, children who deserve a shot at a stronger future, teachers who are on the front lines of everything.
Good stuff, Sam. I got to take a break here. Sam, I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Sam Cornale, Executive Director of the Democratic National Committee. Quick break, right back.